Another morning, getting up, feeling the energy to create, make some stuff up, do some things that I normally wouldn't do. Using this as an opportunity to grow in different ways, to have different ideas and innovations come my way. And I think for me, maybe growing up when we did not have all of the online resources and things to do, we had to create, we had to make up things, we had to get outside, and we were encouraged to get outside and to do things. So when I was growing up, I was always a pretty active person. All right, I was probably a pretty active kid, maybe even more so than a lot of kids. However, I kept myself constantly busy doing stuff. And one of the things that from the very get-go that I always did was I created things. I figured out how to create training methods that I wanted to use to develop something, and I would just find stuff in the garage and I would start to make something up. And I would do that up in my bedroom, I would do that outside. I created obstacle courses out of things that were around us. I created training equipment out of boat buoys and bungee cords and baseballs and tennis balls and sticks. Created a variety of different modes of training. That's all I did. I loved it. Figured stuff out because I wanted to do something. And there was times when I was a kid when we would go up to our cabin for 2 weeks at a time. And when you're a kid and you have all your friends that you hang around with, and then you are up at your cabin for 2 weeks with your parents, you figure out stuff to do. And I would go into the woods and I would climb trees, I would create and build things, I would go swimming, I would snorkel, I would run. I was constantly trying something, trying to find something to do. And that mentality continued on as I grew older. I never lost that desire to want to find ways to create, ways to innovate, ways to invent different ways to train, to do things. And that has carried me over well into the martial arts for sure. And there's been many times in my life where, due to the fact that I got injured or I was stuck at some place, that I had to figure out and reinvent not only things to train, but I had to reinvent my life. There was times where injuries would force me to totally alter how I got through my day. I wouldn't really freak out about it. I would just go with the flow more or less, and I'd figure out stuff to do. When I was in college, I was wrestling in college, and I ended up injuring my knee. And I was training in martial arts at that time with Rick Fay at the Minnesota Calling Group at the third one, because the first one was kind of in his garage. And then we had this brief one on First Avenue by this dance studio. Didn't work out too well with all the sticks clicking. Then we moved to the Washington Avenue one. And when I was wrestling at the University of Minnesota, I hurt my knee and I had to get surgery. So I had crutches. I had my knee wrapped up. I lived at the University of Minnesota. I never had a car until I think my third year or fourth year of college. And I ran everywhere. Ran, or I rode my bike, or I'd get picked up by somebody, and that's how I got around. And I wanted to train, so what I do, I went from Dinkytown, where I lived at the University of Minnesota, and I crutched downtown Minneapolis because I wanted to train. And obviously I couldn't do the same type of training that I did before, where I was kicking and punching and doing tons of footwork and be able to do tie pads and focus mitts and, you know, very active. So I had to figure out stuff to do. But guess what? There's heavy bags, there's speed bags, there's wooden dummies. We have stick work to do Carenza. We have the ability to do different types of training methods with partners. And so I just figured stuff out. And it's the same thing right now. I figure stuff out. And by doing that, sometimes you end up creating and figuring out some awesome things that have to do with maybe a technique that you were working on, or a position that you had problems with, or there's some attributes that you needed to develop. And you figure out a training method, because necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you start to find ways to train. You start to find ways to reinvent yourself when you have to, because of the situation that you find yourself in. And that's where we are now. Now, going up to a little heavier stick. Now, additionally, I probably had to make my greatest reinvention of myself about 17 years ago. Almost exactly 17 years ago, I had my stem cell transplant after battling 2 cancers back to back. I had stage 4 liver cancer, and then I had what was called neurolymphomatosis, which the lymphoma had drifted into my sciatic nervous system and pretty much took away my legs. I was 100% invalid in a hospital, couldn't do anything for months. I was down at Rochester Mayo Hospital for months in those rooms. And of course, at that point in time, I wasn't thinking about how I was going to train, what I was going to do. I was figuring out how to stay alive. I was figuring out how to stay positive and how to battle the internal demons of doubt and despair that definitely do come into your life when you are battling something that is life-threatening and it doesn't seem to go away, and it gets worse and worse. And then as soon as you see a light at the end of the tunnel caves in. It definitely forces you to do different things, and I had to be very creative with my mind because I couldn't even move my body. This was for months and months and months. And in fact, when I could move my body, when I had liver cancer, I did Carenza very slowly. I did some walking. But I was doing a lot of resting because it was tiring. You're doing chemotherapy and it is rough. But here's the thing that happened. I remember I was going through, it was between my 3rd and 4th chemo, and it was the summer. It was in July. And this was going to be one of the first Thai camps that I would not have been able to go to since it started in 1990. And I was like, gosh, I don't want to miss camp. And I figured, what the heck, this was a great time for a family trip. So we loaded up the car, got the kids, Gunnar and Nina, my wife V at the time, and we drove across country. And we took our time and we just looked at the sights and made it a family trip. Spent a lot of time together, and I ended up really surprising Achan Chai by showing up when he had no idea I was going to come. And of course I had no hair. I was a little bit bloated from prednisone, from the chemo that I was going through, and I honestly surprised him and everybody else by showing up. And you know what? I tried to do my best to hang out and teach some stuff as I was there. But it was about the journey. It was about not being confined and stuck, but figuring out something to do and then doing it. Well, I had to reinvent my entire life pretty much after my cancer, because prior to my cancer, remember, I was very athletic, grew up doing all sports. I was an All-American gymnast. I was a wrestler, wrestled for University of Minnesota. I was constantly training, hours and hours and hours every day of training. And then, all of a sudden, in your 30s, 36, 37 years old, bam, it's done. You're now confined to fighting an internal war. But all those years of creating, all those years of using my mind to figure out things, all of those years of athletic development and learning how to deal with the ups and the downs of competition, all of those years of pushing myself super hard to the point of absolute exhaustion, those years of cutting weight and wrestling, those years of pushing through whatever got in my way, those years of starting my business and having nothing but working my way through it, those years of doing new things all of the time. Everything was new. We didn't have videos. At the beginning of our training, we had to go out to camps, we had to go out to seminars. Went to Thailand for the first time in 1989 and just went out there. I went to Los Angeles and trained. I went down to North Carolina, took a plane down there, had no idea what was going on. 1985 for the Great Smoky Mountain Camp. It was about adventure. It was about just doing things and being able to train. Well, all of that stuff is just a platform, a foundation for when we find times in our life like this, where we have to change, where we have to alter things, where we have to be creative and innovative and maybe a little bit inventive with our time, with our energy, modify things that we already know. And I had to do this. I had to do it all many times in my life. When I came back from my cancer, as I was saying, I had to start everything all over. Of course, I had a technical platform that I developed over years, but I had a different body now. I had a body that was relearning how to walk. I had a body that had a left foot that didn't work, that had nerve damage. I had a body that was really, at the beginning, I had to be on a lot of still pain medication. So I was on opioids, I was on methadone, I was on Lyrica, I was on gabapentin and Neurontin. I was on still a lot of different pain medications. So I'd be training and I'd be teaching and I would literally doze off. And the guys at the gym call it the methadose. Oh, he's in the methadose. And I would be in a mid-sentence and simply stop and then start right up in the middle of the sentence again while I was teaching. New territory. But it opened up my mind to different ways to train because I had a new body basically. I didn't have that same athleticism that I once had. And I had to figure out different ways to do the same things that I had done for years and years and years. And guess what? It became a blessing. It paid off. It paid off in dividends because the biggest change that happened to me is I became more empathetic to people that had problems doing moves. At one time, I'd be like, how can a person not do a shrimp? How can they not move their hips and their feet slide in this basic simple movement. Well, guess what? When I came back, I tried to do the shrimp. My feet slipped, my hips didn't move, and I went, oh my God, I am now the person I used to make fun of. Got to figure this out. And guess what? That was from the shrimp on up. Every move from there, I had to figure out, how do I do this with this new body that I have? What that do? It gave me empathy, gave me a way to create ways to train and do things that I did not have to even consider before. Now I was there inventing, figuring things out. It was like a brand new adventure. And again, it paid off. Heavier sticks, sassafras wood. It paid off because we had a variety of people come in, and I started to change my entire philosophy. Is, man, the people that need the martial arts are the people that actually really need the martial arts. It's not the athlete, it's not the tough guy, it's not the person who's already a fighter who just wants to refine those skills. It's the person who cannot fight, is not confident, does not have the ability to move, and is not a natural athlete or an athlete maybe at all. That is the person that really needs martial arts. And I was somewhat that person. Of course, mentally, I was a different person because of all the physical training and athletic and training that I had for the majority of my life. But I had to figure out physically how to move differently. I had to reinvent myself again. And I had guys come in and people come in that had physical problems. They had issues with their body, they had injuries, they had some of them very severe, and they couldn't do some of the stuff that some of the instructors were teaching. And those instructors sometimes couldn't modify for them. So I said, hey, instead of quitting, why don't we do some privates? And I ended up working with the people, and some of them coming from backgrounds where they were martial artists, but due to age and due to injury and sometimes very severe injury, they were unable to do what they did. They couldn't do anything almost. And years later, some of those people are moved up to blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, and they're still going. And guess what? They still have physical ailments. They're aging, they still have issues, and they have to figure out how to reinvent themselves all the time. But the fact that I had been able to now empathize, to be able to create in my own life things that I had to do to become a better martial artist, to just be a martial artist, period, all now paid off. Once again, the circumstance, the environment, what life gave me, I had to figure out how to use it to my advantage. And guess what? Here we are. We're in this new phase of our life right now where now everybody has to deal with this in some way. You have to shut down your schools, you can't go to work, you can't train and do the things that you love with the people you want to be around. You have to be by yourself or with the same people for an extended period of time. Well, this is the time to start to reinvent, to start to create, to start to be that new person. Go up to another level. Don't think of this as something that's cutting you down. Look at this as something that's building you up, that's allowing you to spend more time than you ever would doing things that you never probably would have done. Maybe you've never picked up a stick and swung it, but I'll tell you this, it's beautiful, it's great for your joints, it's an overall movement drill. You become more fluid and flowing, your grip becomes better, your joints recuperate and become more alive. Your body has another training method that it can do when maybe you're really fatigued or need to recuperate. So there you go. Maybe you didn't spend enough time honing a specific choke. So now you have this time to develop the muscles, develop the grip that you need to be more functional when you got a hold of that collar. Maybe this is a time that you can take a set of tie pads or any kind of pad and learn a little bit more about ground and pound and how to be a more effective ground striker. You can now shift from striking to squeezing to striking to squeezing and create different drills on your own. Maybe this is a time that you're going to start yoga, that you're going to start becoming more flexible because as you aged, you lost your flexibility. So now you have this time to stretch. You have this time to get into yoga. You can watch online courses. Maybe this is the time that you're going to do an online course that you never would have had time to do before. Now you can take something, create something. You can have books you can read. You can have books you can listen to. You can sit down and be with your family. If you have not had the opportunity and the time to be with your family, don't look at this as something that's lessening your life. Look at it as something that's going to allow you to be a better person, faster, stronger, more flexible, a person that's going to be more creative, more innovative, more inventive, a person that's going to learn how to live with themselves. A person who's going to now start to meditate when you never meditated. A person who's going to learn how to be alone a little bit with their thoughts and maybe start to write those thoughts down and become more creative. Maybe it's a time for you to literally invent something that's never been invented before. I don't know. I don't know where your brain is, but this is not a time that we just give up. We just sit around. It's a time to reinvent. And when we do come back, we'll have more to add to the game. All right, so Greg Nelson here, just a little morning jabber as I work through my sticks, light sticks, medium sticks, to really heavy sticks. Why? Because I have the time. Bam.